Everybody, thanks for joining in on this beautiful evening. Tempting to be outside. Nice to have you joining me here in the virtual world to talk about plants. My background, school education wise, is in environmental education and science communication. I've spent a lot of time with kids and adults outside tramping around the forest looking for fun stuff, and in recent years have moved towards more of an academic setting, talking about science communication with more of adult audiences. And so I don't get to hang out with kindergartners as much as I used to, but I have my own 3-year-old now who keeps me quite entertained anyway. I am a naturalist sort of by my own training, but I do have a background as a professional naturalist as well, and used to lead guided walks on national forest land and in national parks, not as a ranger, but working for nonprofit organizations. And so have done a lot of science and naturalist interpretation out in the world as well. So it's a real passion of mine. Citizen science is an amazing thing, and I'm so honored to be focusing on it with my position with the Natural History Museum of Utah. It's a wonderful job. And I'm thrilled to be sharing a little bit more about that with you today. So before I get too far into things, I just did want to again say thanks to Mark, thanks to Kathy, thank you to Allison for connecting me with this group. And again, thanks to all of you for having me. And I wanted to also start by saying that in this era of virtual gatherings, it's important to reflect on our own physical sense of place and the land that we occupy. And I'm glad that you all were doing some notes earlier, or some housekeeping earlier, so I could talk. Had to pull up notes on a new computer, so forgive me for looking over here to the side. I have a second computer next to my other laptop. I feel very techie today. So I'd like to honor Indigenous peoples who have called this place home. I'm talking to you here from my home in Salt Lake City, which is the ancestral homelands of the Ute tribe. The Natural History Museum of Utah is part of the University of Utah, who acknowledges that the Salt Lake Valley has been a gathering place for Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to talk to you more about citizen science, and specifically how citizen science can support records of global biodiversity, and how you can play a key role in this ongoing conversation that's evolving all the time. Let me pull up my slides. Now that I've got 2 screens, I also have 2 mouses as well. 2 mice, 2 computer mice. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so again, my name is Ellen Eiriksson, and I manage citizen science programs at the Natural History Museum of Utah. Tonight, you're going to hear me talk a lot about something called iNaturalist. This is a free, publicly accessible database that is online. You can also download it as an app on your mobile device. iNaturalist depends on users observing and identifying nature, taking a photo of it, recording it with geotagged information, and then collaborating with the online iNaturalist community to identify what you photographed. I think that iNaturalist is an excellent tool for many reasons that I will get into this evening, but it's also not perfect by any stretch. And so I'll touch on some of those imperfections as well. I'd also like to note that there are many platforms that people can engage with to learn about nature. So iNaturalist isn't the only tool. There are things like eBird, there are wonderful phenology tracking apps, lots of great resources exist in this realm. So iNaturalist is just one of them, but it is something that I use personally and professionally quite a lot. And it's a great platform to capture broad nature things. It's able to capture plants, animals, birds and insects. And that makes it a really fun tool when you're outside because it has such a wide range. I'm going to go through some demos on how to use iNaturalist, how to make observations, and then of course how to identify observations that are being made as well. And then of course I'll have some time at the end to answer questions and chat with you all about anything that you're interested in related to iNaturalist or maybe citizen science in general. And so with that, Mark, feel free to chime in at any time if questions are coming through the chat. I'm happy to answer things as they come in. I likely won't be seeing them because PowerPoint is I know I won't be seeing them. All I see is PowerPoint on my laptop. So it feels like I'm just talking to myself. Maybe I am. I hope I'm not. So anyway, feel free to chime in.
You're doing great.
Okay, great. You can hear me. Cool. So really do chime in if people have questions mid-talk. I'm happy to do that. So let's dive in. To get started, let's just touch on citizen science. The Oxford Dictionary defines citizen science as scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, often in concert or collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists or scientific institutions. I think of citizen science as being much more than that. I talk a lot about the power of community and what that can mean to science. I think of citizen science really as a conversation between members of the community and scientists. Many audiences, many voices, many experiences, all making important contributions to the advancement of science, asking questions, observing, recording information, discussing things, all making science part of our daily lives. And I think that's a really exciting thing. In a recent study, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History conducted a survey with Morris Poll to better understand how people connect with science. This was a randomized survey nationally with representation from a wide range of people from different areas and political affiliations and a whole wide range of humans. And they found that 90% of Americans think it's necessary for people like themselves to have a basic understanding of science. They also found that 92% of people believe that the health of the environment directly impacts their own health. 88% of survey responders trust science and scientists. 86% feel connected to the natural world. As a science educator who has been talking to people about the natural world, especially for well over 20 years, this is a really exciting thing. I think if you had told me that this study was happening, I would have been nervous about what the results were going to be, especially when it comes to trusting science and people's interest levels in science. So this survey or this study is showing that people are interested in science. They're eager to learn. They're open to new ideas, which is a really great recipe for encouraging people to take part in citizen science, which really in turn gets people more connected with the scientific practice and empowered to be part of their communities and appreciating the world that they're living in. Interestingly, in this study, more than half of respondents believe that scientists have documented all living things. Of course, this is incorrect. There are roughly 1.2 million species currently documented on the planet, while it's estimated that there are over 8.7 million species on Earth. That means that 86% of species on Earth are waiting to be documented. 86%. New discoveries, of course, are happening all the time. New species are being described. Here's a species of whale, a baleen whale that in 2001 was described by scientists. It's called the Rice's whale. It's found in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, smaller organisms are being found all the time as well. This is all a pretty exciting thing, I think. And something that's especially exciting to me is that this global biodiversity awaiting discovery isn't just up to professionally trained scientists to find. citizen scientists around the world are making these discoveries too. Citizen scientists are active participants in this process. And really, that's people like us who don't maybe have degrees in specific areas, or maybe we're scientists in one way, but not in another way. It's pretty cool to think that we could be discovering and describing new species ourselves. So something else that I love about this is that sometimes, especially with a citizen scientist, they might not know that they're finding something that is different or unique or exciting. And that's where iNaturalist comes into play, because if you're using the right tool when you're out observing nature, a tool that can help you communicate with scientists and others who are knowledgeable in a certain field, then you are able to spread some interesting and exciting things. And I can get into what that means. There are great examples of iNaturalist being a catalyst for people discovering new things. Here we have a screen grab from an iNaturalist observation of a snail. And this snail, well, so to backtrack, in the 1700s, a member of Captain James Cook's sea voyages around the Southern Pacific picked up a snail shell. They drew it in a journal. It's pictured here on the slide. And it turned out that that was a new species of snail that ended up being described for the first time decades later, based on these drawings. And nobody ever saw it again. In 2014, an iNaturalist user in Vietnam saw a snail, posted the photo to iNaturalist, labeled it as a gastropod because they didn't know anything more specific than that. And when a researcher on iNaturalist who knew what they were looking at saw this image, which in fact was a living example of a mollusk, or of a mollusk that had never been seen other than in a drawing, people got super excited. So this was a first photographic record. And so this is from the chat here, this quote, it says, "This is the first ever photograph of a living snail discovered way back in the 1700s. Somebody just happened to see this when they were hanging out in Vietnam and took a picture of it. Here's another great find on iNaturalist. This is a green mountain quillwort that was found in Vermont. It's a newer species of plant that was first reported on iNaturalist before getting its official name. And here you can see in the activity, and I'll get into what all of these things mean on iNaturalist, but the user who posted the image posted it as a quillwort. And then as it became described more specifically, they were able to change that to this new name, which is pretty cool. Here's another interesting find. This was from a high school student in DC who was out in a park, saw a salamander, took a photo, put it on iNaturalist. It turns out this is a salamander that's endemic to the eastern part of the United States. And this photo was the first record from Arlington County, Virginia, which is in the Washington, DC area. Pretty wild. A high school student just happened to see this. Here's another interesting find. This is one of my own, actually, on iNaturalist. I was in Colorado on a trip. I took a picture of this jumping spider that I saw on a wall. There were lots of other jumping spiders on this outdoor wall. I see lots of jumping spiders when I'm out and about, and I have many photos of them in my iNaturalist account. I assumed this was just some other jumping spider at some stage in its life that I didn't exactly recognize. I snapped a photo, I put it on iNaturalist, and this is the quote from one of these spider experts who saw my post. He says, "This looks like some kind of Pelinus longimanus, forgive my pronunciation, relative, which is not even supposed to exist in Colorado. Thanks for your submission. This is an awesome," in all caps, record. So that for me as an iNaturalist user, just a casual iNaturalist user, was super exciting and really motivating. I love that on any given day, I could be outside photographing something, and I happen to see something at a specific moment in time that could have some pretty big impacts in the scientific community. I know for a fact that this person ended up going to look for this spider in a similar area to where I was, and he found more and he was so thrilled, and he's doing some genetic studies now, and he told me that if this ends up being a different species, that he'll name it after me. Oh my God. Anyway, this kind of stuff is super exciting, and it's happening on iNaturalist all the time. So this is part of that wonderful conversation that's taking place. At the Natural History Museum of Utah, we also use iNaturalist records to help us with scientific research. We specifically lately have been using it to look at the distribution of introduced species, a research project that we're running right now, engaging citizen scientists, is examining a species of tree squirrel called the fox squirrel. And they're introduced to the state of Utah. They've really only been here for about 10 years. And so early on, the way we sort of tracked their distribution and their expansion in range was looking at iNaturalist observations. iNaturalist has free, publicly accessible data that any of us could go look at right now. So we're able to combine that information with new data that we're now starting to collect. And so while iNaturalist was fabulous at the beginning to track some distribution, we've moved into using our own survey methods using an ArcGIS platform called Survey 123 that I can customize to ask specific questions that we're really interested in that iNaturalist can't do. iNaturalist really is just based in a photo record that's geotagged with a specific time stamp. There's an area you can type notes in, but there's not really a way to talk about other stuff. And so having a more specific survey like our fox squirrel one has been really helpful for us, but there's no way we would have been doing that if we hadn't been capturing information on iNaturalist. And also we still do look at iNaturalist because new observations will come in from around the state to help us understand if squirrels are moving and changing, which is pretty interesting. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and so apologies if iNaturalist is new to you and I'm already talking about stuff that you don't quite understand. Let's backtrack just a little bit here. Essentially, in a nutshell, when you use iNaturalist, it's all about finding wildlife, taking a picture of it, and sharing it. Pretty simple. And as I shared, I'm sorry, here we go. Oh, sorry. It can lead to some pretty exciting discoveries. Here is a screenshot of the iNaturalist web browser platform. All of those little red dots symbolize an observation that's been made. As of this week, there are over 93 million observations globally on iNaturalist, each observation representing an individual record of a specific organism at a specific time in a specific place. In Utah, there are over 371,000 observations in the state, which is pretty great. 191,000 plus of those are of plants. If you can imagine this ever increasing record of biodiversity, all these little red dots, they start to tell a story after a time, and really lots of interesting stories over a time. iNaturalist is really capturing this data actively, and especially data in urban areas, because that's where people are living. Another sort of drawback of iNaturalist is that really it's only as good as when it's being used. And so, of course, it can be a great record of where certain species are living. You can see here population hotspots around the state are sort of highlighted based in the deeper colors of red because higher concentrations of iNaturalist observations have occurred there, or those are places where people are visiting a lot. And so just because there are fewer observations in a certain area doesn't mean there's not a lot of biodiversity there. There might just not be anybody there making observations. But all of this is really exciting. And I think especially when it comes to urban settings, collecting biodiversity data can be fabulous, especially in these times where we're seeing shifts in species distribution and populations based on climate change and other things. So people are capturing information on iNaturalist while they're out on a walk with their dog, sitting in backyards, going on a hike at their lunch break, maybe a hike for the weekend as well. when I first joined iNaturalist, I had some self-imposed pressure to post pictures of cool stuff. Initially, I was like, oh, I'm not finding anything cool enough to take a picture of, to put on iNaturalist. And really, that's not what the site is about at all. Even the most, what may seem common to us thing can provide really interesting information. So these people here taking pictures of dandelions, for example, who knows what the natural landscape is going to look like in that park in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Having this interesting record of changes over time can become quite useful. So saying, wow, remember when there used to be a lot of dandelions there? Who knows, maybe that's something that will happen. Or, my gosh, we're really seeing a bunch more dandelions now. The site can really start to tell some interesting information. And I think that's super exciting. So no pressure to post anything super cool. Finding something normal is fine. And I will admit to you, for a stretch of time, I was the leading observer on all of iNaturalist of eastern box elderbugs, which are very common around my home, very common around the Natural History Museum of Utah during certain times of year. And I just happened to have a lot of observations of them because when I would do presentations like this, or often classes up at the museum, hanging out with some kids to talk about iNaturalist, guaranteed I could go outside of my house or the museum, find a box elderbug to take a picture of when I was doing my demo. So anyway, totally comfortable with that. I'm totally fine. Someone, honestly, in the past couple of months has usurped me. So I'll have to get out taking more box elder pictures pretty soon. Let's dive into making observations. So, well, let me go back a slide. So remember, finding wildlife, taking a picture of wildlife, sharing the wildlife with iNaturalist. Here's a photo, a screen grab from an iNaturalist observation on my phone. Every iNaturalist observation has the ability to have a photo, or multiple photos is better. It is tagged, sometimes ideally to the species level, but maybe you can't always get down that specific, so maybe it's the genus level. That's fine. It's put into some sort of taxonomic bucket. It has a pin here on a map that shows where I was when the observation happened. And then you can see at the bottom, there's some green check marks. Basically, that's telling me that it's research grade. Research grade is iNaturalist speak for this is a scientifically valid record. Other people have seen this. They've agreed with what I've labeled it as, which is a fox squirrel. And so going back to those 3 green check marks, if I click on the 3, and actually here, let me change I can get a little pointer going here for you, so you can see what I'm doing.
We can see your pointer.
You can? Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. So down here are the research grade levels. If I click on my phone on these 3 dots, then it's going to show me this. And so this shows the label I initially gave the species. And then this person has agreed with me. Awesome. Because the 2 of us agree on this classification, it becomes a research grade observation. If a 3rd person were to come in here and say, actually, I think this is a different kind of squirrel, they're able to do that. And then it can shift my observations research grade. And so 2/3 of people commenting on a single observation, if they all agree, it's research grade. If people don't agree, if less than 2/3 of observers disagree, then it's not considered research grade just yet, which is a pretty interesting thing. Here, look, this is what the screen looks like when I'm making an observation. At the top here, you can see where I've got my photos added. This specific observation just had 1 picture that I added because this squirrel scurried away, and that was the only picture that I could get. If I had notes to make, I'd put them in here. I put arrows in here, great. So there's my species, photos, the date and the time, the location that I was at, geo-privacy settings. I'm going to exit out of this and I'm going to stop sharing. Hello again. And I'm going to do an observation for you live from my phone, so you can see what this looks like as I'm doing it, because I think that will be a little more helpful for you. Let's see. Okay, so now you're seeing my phone screen. Here we have my iNaturalist app. And when you first get in to your app, typically you're seeing a list of all of the observations that you've made. I'm using an iPhone, so this is how it looks on a Mac product. Perhaps you have an Android device, it looks a little bit differently. They have essentially the same functionality. If I'd like to make an observation, you click down here at the bottom, there's a camera. If you're on an Android, there's a plus button that you would touch. And you've got some options. In the moment, you could take a photo right then and there. That's definitely something you can do. That's something I basically never do because I don't like that. I like to take a bunch of pictures in my camera app that's on my phone and then upload them later. That's my tip. That's my preferred method. So that's when I would go to my photo library and pull out photos, which is what I'll do for you now. This is a new functionality on mobile devices. You can also record sound. And so this doesn't really help with plants, but if you're out and you happen to hear some bird song that you don't recognize, you could select this, hit record, it'll record what you're hearing, and then you can post that. So it doesn't have a photo potentially associated with it. You could add one if you happen to see the thing that's making sound. But if you don't, you can also just add an audio record, which I think is pretty cool. But let's do photos because I'm gonna talk about that. So these are now loading photos from my camera that I've taken just this afternoon. So really what I do when I'm outside is I have my camera app just open on my phone, especially if I know I want to be iNaturalisting, and I'll just be snapping photos. And sometimes they're really bad photos, and then I'll go in and I'll delete the ones that are terrible, and the ones that I'd like to add a heart to, because it's easier for me to identify them when I'm looking at it on a smaller screen like this. So this is a plant that I came across earlier outside in my yard, and I'm going to select the images that I've given a heart to. I think, oh, so it's only going to let me do 4 at a time. Great, that's fine. I could go back in here to the plus button and I can add more photos if I wanted to. Sometimes I take lots of pictures of a thing. Think of your photo as really potentially telling 1,000 words about what it is that you're looking at. So once I've got my image in there, then iNaturalist asked me, what did I see? I'm going to select it. iNaturalist has an AI functionality, and so it's going to look at the picture that you've taken, and based on the AI's capabilities and the quality of the photo that you've taken, it's going to do its best job to identify what you've seen. And you can see here, it's giving me some suggestions of things that it thinks that it might be. And it's doing a pretty good job because in fact, this is a type of a speedwell. I'm going to go back for a second. One thing to note when it's doing AI, when iNaturalist does the AI ID, it's only identifying or looking at or scanning the first image in your lineup. And so maybe it's not giving me the information that I want. You can switch what your default picture is. So if I select this, a new one will come up. What did you see? Oops, I'm trying to click it on my computer. That's not working on my phone. And you can see here, it gives me slightly different information. Once I've got a list here that I'm interested in, maybe I don't know much about what I'm taking a picture of, which I will admit sometimes happens with me and with plants. You can just go with something nice and simple, like the genus here. I think that's fine. When somebody else, like maybe Eiriksson, who happens to know more about plants, or I suspect many of you on this call, you would be able to help me make this more of a specific observation, and I'll get into that. The other thing I think is cool about all of this is that maybe I want to learn a little bit more about the possibility of what this is. Like, okay, is it an ivy leaf speedwell? Is it a bird's eye speedwell? I'm not sure. If I click on this I button on the side, it's going to pull up information that it has in the site about this plant, including images of it that you can scroll through. These are great things to compare to your images that you've taken, or if you happen to still be in front of that thing, you can be comparing it. It's got a description of what it is. that you can click on to find out more information. It's also got a distribution map, which is helpful. I am pretty sure this is an Ivy Leaf speedwell. But if anyone is,
if anybody else wants to
is anyone screaming
put
and
their
telling me,
ID in the chat, go for it.
do people think it's different? I'm also happy to leave it at a broader speedwell. And actually, you know, maybe for the purpose of this exercise, well, no, I'm going to leave it there for this. But really, please do feel free if you disagree with me. If I had some notes to say about this, like maybe, oh, I could talk about a moth that I happen to see feeding on this. This is a place you could add notes if you wanted to. I'm not going to. The date and the time automatically are saved with information of my photo, so I don't have to add that, as is the location that I took the picture. And then down here, you can see there's geoprivacy. This is an interesting one. I think especially with certain kinds of things that you might come across in the world, maybe you're seeing something that you don't want to give away the exact location of. That happens sometimes, and that's totally fine. You could still record it in iNaturalist and move it. Select your observation to be only seen in an obscured way, which means it'll showcase like a large circle essentially over the area, the broader area where you found the thing, or you could keep it private. Keeping it private means it's not, I think, wouldn't ever be a research grade observation because people aren't going to be able to see it and confirm that you saw it in the place that you did. But obscured would be okay for scientific validity. If you're comfortable, and I think, you know, in most cases, I would highly recommend that you leave it open because more information and data, I think, is always better. But I know there are cases of people coming across things they don't want to give specific locations on, of all different kinds of taxa. For example, I've definitely come across signs of mountain lions, say in the foothills around Salt Lake City, that I will obscure some of those observations. And actually,
So,
really,
Ellen, how obscure is obscure? Like if we see a rare plant, we don't want people to know where to look for it. Is it like 1 or 2 miles? Is it 5 or 10 miles?
You know, that's a great question mark. Let's label this as obscure, and then we can look when I upload this, because I don't actually know the answer to that. The other thing that is interesting on this is saying something is captive or cultivated. The best kind of iNaturalist observation is something that's occurring wildly. And so it's not about recording tulips and yards and that sort of thing, but sometimes that happens, or sometimes maybe there is an interesting cultivated thing you'd like to share, and that's totally fine. So if you happen to be taking a picture of something that you know is a cultivated species or a captive species, you could say, yes, this is definitely not a cultivated species growing in my driveway. The last thing on this list here says projects. This is kind of an outdated thing with iNaturalist. In the olden days of iNaturalist, maybe 5 years ago or more, to add photos and observations to a project, which means somebody is curious about a specific area in the world and wanting to collect iNaturalist observations in that area, you had to join a project or manually add your observation to a place. You don't have to do that anymore. Most iNaturalist projects these days are called umbrella projects, and they automatically capture information from an area that you're specifying. And so you don't typically need to add things to projects, but there are a few that that might require that. So that's where you would say, put it into a specific project. After all of that, I've got my images. I feel good about how I've labeled it. Mine says save. In my settings, which is up here in the top, I have this toggle for automatic upload off. Basically, that means that instead of on my screen where I just hit save, if I have it on, if I have automatic upload on, then it would say upload or something, and it would automatically push it into a live observation. I have it off because oftentimes I'm out on a hike or I'm far away and I'm not on my Wi-Fi. And so it basically waits here in the cloud to be uploaded. And then I can manually push it to be loaded when I feel like I'm on a Wi-Fi network. That dramatically saves my battery when I'm not having an adventure. So now it's going to upload this observation. So I'm going to leave it there because I'd like to show you some stuff on my computer too. So don't worry about this Ivy Leaf speedwell and your question mark about geotagging, because we're going to come back to it. So let me push you back to my PowerPoint. And we'll talk about a few quick more things. I'll do one more demo and then we'll have some questions. Are there questions now I could answer while I'm pulling up my presentation again? Okay. Okay, so here we are, back to our screen. Now you're experts in this. The other, I'm working backwards. So we talked about sharing the observation. Now let's talk about taking the picture. Taking a photo really is a crucial part of an iNaturalist observation. Your image is setting the scene and telling the story and passing on data to everybody else who wasn't there with you. And so when you're taking photos, consider getting as close as you can, of course, within reason. These are two images here that are both lovely pictures. The one that's of this great landscape, we've got some sage and some junipers and some pinions, and there's a whole bunch of great stuff happening in there. I don't know what this iNaturalist, if you were to put this on iNaturalist, I don't know what this is of. Is it the sagebrush? Is there a fox hiding behind a bush that I can't see? This is an example of a great nature picture, but a terrible iNaturalist photo. However, if you were to zoom in, for example, and see this lovely moth here, this is a great example of an iNaturalist observation. You know exactly what the picture is of. I will say sometimes it can be great to have a landscape picture, especially if you're taking pictures of plants, because you're showing where you were in some more specific context. And so having a scenery picture in addition to some close-ups are great. But if you're only going to take one, take something nice and close that's more descriptive. Sometimes you can't get close, and that's okay, especially when it comes to wildlife. We want you to be safe. We would like wildlife to be safe. So get as close as you can and take the best picture you can. When it comes to things like birds and large charismatic megafauna, sometimes having a silhouette of something is all you need. Clear images are more helpful than not clear images. And so you can see which one of these pictures tells a better story about the thing you're trying to identify. If I was to add this blurry image of this lady's tresses to iNaturalist, it would probably try to tell me that this is a picture of grass or something, because that's what the focus is on. So considering what's behind you, moving the perspective, there's some dirt behind this other photo, and really getting in a good photo of the plant is useful. And then of course, taking more than one photo is always better than just taking one. So if there is a flower to take a picture of, get the flower shots that you think are most useful, taking a picture of the leaves, and then of course, stepping back and taking a picture of the whole plant. And as I said, if not more, a lot of you might have better ideas on the types of photos that would be better for these sorts of things. So you are all well suited to making excellent iNaturalist observations. Taking more than one photo can be really helpful for other things too, like insects. If I was to just post this first one, I'd know it was a ladybug, but I wouldn't know what kind, because I don't see the entirety of its markings and its face. The second one here shows the front of its body and the face and the head. And then here from above, I can confirm, based on all of these images of the same insect, that this is in fact a 7-spotted lady beetle. More pictures are better. Okay, finding wildlife. Oh, the last step. So of course, when you're looking for wildlife, make sure you're respecting wildlife and property. And remember that wildlife can happen anywhere. This is something I would spend a lot more time on with a different group of people. You all know this. You can find exciting things growing in the sidewalk, crawling on the side of your home, sometimes in your home, in addition to being on walks. I'll talk about the City Nature Challenge. Actually, you know what, since we're on my slides, let's just talk about the City Nature Challenge now. Then we'll talk about more iNaturalist stuff with my demo, a quick one, and then I can answer questions. This is a shameless plug for a program that's coming up at the end of April. April 29th through May 2nd, there's an event called the City Nature Challenge. It's a global BioBlitz happening here in Northern Utah, but in hundreds, I'm talking like 400 to 500 plus cities around the world. The whole point of the City Nature Challenge is to document as much urban biodiversity as you can in this 4-day period. Here in Utah, our city, quote, city, is this large conglomerate of 8 counties: Box Elder, Cache, Davis, Salt Lake, Summit, Utah, Wasatch, and Weber counties. Everything that's green here on this map. We call it Utah's Wasatch. If you're in one of those counties during the City Nature Challenge dates and you make an iNaturalist observation, it automatically gets added to our iNaturalist project, which showcases biodiversity here in Utah and has led to some pretty exciting finds. Last year's challenge, we had nearly 6,000 observations come in over 4 days. We documented 907 species, 14 of which were rare, threatened, or endangered. And we had 417 people participating. And I'm guessing that this year we can get even more. So I hope you can join us. City Nature Challenge, really, you can just do it literally from your own backyard. Take pictures, put them on iNaturalist. It's a great time to get started if you're new to iNaturalist. It's super fun. You can find out more information here at nhmu.utah.edu/challenge. It's one of my most favorite times of year, I will say. I love, love, love the City Nature Challenge. Let me show one more quick thing on iNaturalist. Are there questions I can answer while I'm switching my screens here?
Ellen, 907 species, that was plants and animals together, right?
Yes, yes. Insects, plants, animals, all of them. Yeah, anything that iNaturalist captures.
This group would be interested to know how many plants were, maybe we'll figure that out.
Ooh, I could look that up right now. So when we go to iNaturalist, this is back to our web browser, and I took a screenshot of this earlier. So here we are back to the world. Something else, oops, I had a slide after that didn't show it, but so there's a 4th step to doing some iNaturalist things. You see nature, you take a photo of nature, you share it on iNaturalist, and then if you're a pro, like all of you on this Zoom now and watching this video later, there's a 4th step that you can do, and it's identify. We've touched on this just a tiny bit. I'm going to show you a little bit more about the identify feature here on iNaturalist. So let's say, let's look through all 93 million observations. No. So all of this is publicly available data. I'm logged in, but you could see this without logging in, easy peasy. Let's go back to my, oh, sorry, I have the thing right in the way. Leaved. My Ivy Leaf Speedwell. So if I search for Ivy Leaf Speedwell, it tells me that there are over 6,000 observations that have been made globally. You see here the distribution of them. Maybe I'd like to just look for ones that are in Utah. Maybe this is a species that I personally know a lot about. I don't. But as I'm searching this, it's showing me you can refine your search more and more and more. So if we look for Ivy Leaf Speedwells here in Utah, it'll show all of the most recent ones that have been added to iNaturalist. Here we are with the observation that I just made from my phone. Here we have the pictures that I added. You can browse through and see what I added. You scroll down here and you can see that this is what I've labeled it as. It's got all of the other information here. One way that somebody will be doing this very soon, I suspect, on the iNaturalist world. Anybody can see this now. You can suggest an identification. I am logged in on my computer through my Natural History Museum of Utah account. Something I could do here is say, wow, this is beautiful. This is a kind of speedwell we've never seen before. Of course, it's not. This is a very common one. But this is a great place to comment on observations if you see something interesting. You could also suggest an ID by clicking here. It's going to do exactly what it did on my phone. Once I click species name, it's going to load suggestions. The AI is always doing its best to tell you what it thinks it is. So you could go again with what it thinks it is. And so if I do agree that this is an Ivy Leaf Speedwell, I could click agree here, or I could click it here. Another thing that I could do is say, actually, no, I think this is different. I think this might be a bird's eye speedwell instead. And I would be doing that after I looked through these pictures and the images and deciding, okay, I look at the leaf structure and I see the stems. And sometimes a photo doesn't have enough information for you to identify things, and that's totally fine. This is a place that you could be adding an ID. I think that's more if you're looking for things a little specifically. Something else that you could do is, if I say go back to all of these observations, you can see them not only in a map, but here in a grid. Oh, actually, Mark, let's go back to what you were saying earlier. I'm remembering your question. Sorry, bear with me. So you can see this is what it's giving me for obscured, this big green box. So I don't know what to say about what the square footage of that is. I can point to where I am. I'm like right here.
That seems great for preventing people from finding a rare plant.
Totally, yeah, totally. I'll go in and change this later, but that's what that looks like. Okay, so let's see. There are other ways that you can do some identifying, and actually, I think what I'd like to show you here in the limited time that I have up here in the menu, there's this thing called identify, this little menu option. You can click on this. And if you, again, happen to be an expert in a specific taxonomic area, great. Start searching for it here and you can go look through it. When I clicked identify, this again is every iNaturalist observation that's recently been made. And so I keep having to move my zoom out of the way so we can see stuff here. But so you can see these things that people have been finding, and these are new to the site. Brand new. So I could click on this robin observation that was just recently made, and why is it not showing me what I want to show? And then I can scroll over to these others. I'm sorry, cockroaches. Huzzah. I'm in like a quick view mode. That's not what I wanted to see. Well, that's okay. So once you're here, this can be a fast way to go in and add some IDs yourself. And so a really useful thing that isn't discussed quite as much with iNaturalist. It's all about, oh, take a photo, get out there, make observations of nature. But there's this back end component, this conversational component, where there are people who look at what you've taken photos of and help ID it. And that's a really, really crucial part to this scientific process. So being able to go in and add expertise, which again, I think many of you have, to people's observations is really, really, really important. So this person said that this is a typical thrush. This to me looks like an American robin, but I'm wrong. I'm having a panic that I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. You can go over to these different tabs, see pictures of what they've photographed. iNaturalist here is suggesting that it's an American robin. And then there's some other interesting things you can do. So if you're people, especially when it comes to other observations, you can note that if it was dead, you could go in, and if somebody took a picture of a plant that is captive or cultivated, you could go in and say, actually, this tulip is not wild. This is a captive species. This identify tool is the fast way to go through and search for certain things. And so again, I could do ivy-leaved speedwell. And it's not what I meant to open. That was a description of what the species was itself. iNaturalist can get into lots of great detail. It'll tell you this is where the top observer is. That's where I was listed for Eastern box elder bugs. Anyway, so there's lots of interesting information here. So you can learn some things about plants as well. That functionality, I think, is not as good as other sites that can have better searching. But again, here are all of the ivy-leaved speedwells.
Hey, Ellen?
Yeah.
I think it's important to distinguish, there's two different things you're talking about. One is, is your plant, which was the speedwell that you put in earlier.
Correct.
You have the ability to identify that. What you're showing here is the ability to identify other people's photos, correct?
That's right. And, it's probably confusing because it's both me, but looking at the observation that I was sharing earlier, technically I'm signed in from a different account. So I'm looking at my phone observation as a different user. And so it's the same. So in that case, it's the same.
But somebody asked the question, is there a way to find photos that need an ID? And
Yes.
that's what you do right here.
Awesome.
Right?
Excellent question. Exactly. And so things that need ID that haven't been pushed to research grade just yet are here by clicking on this identify tab. And this is where you'll see those things.
So if somebody's an expert in Mimulus, or they want to learn more about Salix or Carex or whatever, they can type that in and see all the observations of that particular genus.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.